Ladies and gentlemen, One Piece chapter 1121 is out, and are you kidding me? Oh my god. First, I want to just talk about this chapter in general instead of jumping straight to the first panel like we usually do. This is just a One Piece special. I don't think there's another series out there that can evoke this type of reaction out of their audience. Simply because not only is Oda just one of the greatest writers of our generation, just the sheer magnitude that comes from the length of the series to then close out a chapter like this one did in seemingly like a just like the culmination of so many characters being built up throughout 27 years of serialization just to this chapter, right? That's exclusive to One Piece. Exclusive to One Piece, and we're blessed to be able to watch this manga unfold weekly in this era of time. It is just absolutely incredible. So let's jump into the specifics of the chapter now. Now, I know that the entire, I guess we'll call it the broadcast section of Egghead Island where Vegapunk is speaking has had this same format where we're kind of getting events at Egghead happening while Vegapunk's dialogue is kind of showing over those panels, right? So it gives you a feel of like everyone in the world, including the characters on Egghead, are hearing what Vegapunk is saying, while us, the readers, are watching what is unfolding as the world is finding out about the things Vegapunk is talking about. This chapter, in my opinion, was the perfect execution of that style, where we're getting Luffy and Bonnie get their finally cathartic moment against Saturn together, both as Nika, as we're both hearing Vegapunk's speech at the same time, and also the dialogue from the past of Kuma and Vegapunk, right? This is the type of scene that reminds me of episode 1015 from the anime, where we get that flashback of all the people saying they want to defeat Kaido on behalf of Odin, and then Luffy punches Kaido down, right? Same vibe, except in the manga here. That sort of mix up of flashbacks to the build-up, and then Vegapunk's talking about some really symbolic stuff, and then cutting into Luffy and Bonnie punching Saturn. Just that perfect intertwining of different dialogue and different panels is fantastic. I really, again, I mean, maybe I'm glazing this chapter review, but this is something I really think Oda is the best at in this industry. He is just undefeatable at stuff like this, and I think when the anime gets to this moment, it's going to back up that claim 100%, because they have just perfectly laid out the blueprint for the animators to work on this episode whenever it does air, of just flashing back to Kuma's backstory, overlaying Vegapunk's voice over what we're seeing, and then cutting to Luffy and Bonnie just cracking Saturn in the face. Like, it was almost as if I'm witnessing the storyboard for that episode in real time reading this chapter, and it was just executed flawlessly. Even though there's no music to manga, there's no moving parts, it just felt like a perfect sequence of events to lead up to finally Luffy and Bonnie destroying Saturn. I mean, he's probably not dead, but knocking him off the boat and probably freeing themselves of him for the last time this arc. It was just, the sequence was absolutely perfect. And I also think something beautiful about that is that the dialogue that's getting overlaid over Luffy and Bonnie kind of attacking Saturn is not just specifically catering to that story, the story of Bonnie and the life she has suffered because of Saturn. It's also touching on some of the major themes in One Piece that are going to be very important towards the end of the story. For example, the different races that are being prosecuted throughout the world, and discrimination, right? That is not an Egghead Island theme. That is a One Piece theme that's being connected with everything going on in Egghead, right? And I think we're going to talk about this later with that last panel, but the way Oda has Vegapunk's words not only apply to the specific characters and what they're doing this arc, but also have them kind of cover the themes of One Piece and what needs to be liberated and fixed in the final war, is such a beautiful connection that we're making this chapter. And it also leads into, again, we'll get into later, one of the greatest panels in the entire series. Now, last chapter review, I did say I thought last chapter was the perfect point for Vegapunk to end his speech, because I just thought he was going to say something along the lines of, someone else will take the Roger that Manta left behind and reveal the secrets of the Void Century, and the world will come to chaos, right? And I was correct. That is exactly what he's saying here, but I will rescind my statement about wishing that was said last chapter, because the way Vegapunk managed to say this in such a grand manner this chapter was amazing. I can't complain that this speech is getting dragged on when he's dropping fire like this. Are you kidding me? Just as we're going through this chapter, seeing different reactions to what's happening across the world, our main character's trying to escape the island, and Vegapunk's dropping stuff like, is it a coincidence, or did Roger set all this in motion? As we're seeing our characters trying to escape and seeing the world realize things are about to change, right? It's just, I feel like I've said it a million times in this video, but it's just the perfect intertwining of paneling and dialogue and flashbacks and flashes to other characters around the world. It really makes me feel this sense of just what a grand story we're witnessing that is exclusive, like I said before, to One Piece. And this chapter just exemplifies that perfectly. Now, enough beating around the bush. Let's talk about this last panel. Honestly, probably my favorite panel in the last... since I started reading One Piece. When I caught up with the anime and started reading around chapter 900. It was around 1010, actually. This just is ingrained in my memory, and I think not only is it just raw, great illustrations and a super hype panel, I think it also has a lot of implications, which I would like to talk about. So, yes, this panel is amazing. It's already set as my desktop wallpaper, but let's go and actually view what these people are representing, why they are important, why the order they're in is perhaps important, and, kind of just break down each one. So, first of all, we have if I'm looking over here, because I'm looking at the panel, we have the 4 Yonkos up top. I think this is just the easiest one to break down. Oda has built up these 4 characters specifically to be the main driving pirates that will be competing for the One Piece in the end of the story, right? Just look at all 4 of these characters. The fact that they are like the final set of Yonko in the series almost felt predictable, right? Even though it was surprising to see this set of characters become the last 4 pirates contending for the One Piece. If you just look at their history through the story, Shanks, Luffy, Blackbeard, Buggy, it is very obvious that these are the core set of pirates that are going to compete for the One Piece. So not much else to say about that other than there are pirate contenders. And pirates naturally go for the One Piece, so there's not much to talk about there. But what's interesting here in this panel is the lower half with all of these non-pirate affiliated characters. So I'm going to start with this right quadrant of 4 in Akainu, Dragon, Emu, and this mysterious person who we don't know who they are, which I will get to after I talk about the rest of these 3. So obviously, I personally think Akainu, Dragon, and Emu are put together in this section of the page because they all represent the head of an establishment, right? You have Akainu, who is the head of the Marines, right? Which is like the weapon or like the fists of the world government. You have Dragon, who's the head of the revolutionaries. And then you have Emu, who's obviously the secret head of the world government, or even just the world and the celestial dragons. And I think it's very interesting that these 3 are together because they're almost kind of similar. Obviously, I don't mean with what they're fighting for, but these 3 characters to me feel like the most rooted in their ideals. And what I mean by that is by the time the end of the story comes around, there is no redemption or changing sides or kind of wavering for these characters. Obviously, Emu is the big bad of the series. There's not going to be some sort of redemption or change in character with Emu. Dragon has always stood for taking down the world government. There's not going to be any wavering there. And Akainu is this red-hot fire of a leading figure in the Navy. It's up to speculation right now whether he's going to obey the Celestial Dragons and continue to kind of act as their sword, or if he's going to, kind of go on his own and lead the Navy into his own regime because he no longer agrees with the Celestial Dragons. Either way, I don't think that kind of counts as him wavering or like changing sides or like having this sort of complicated character. These 3 characters to me are the most set on their path to the goal. They're most set in their ideals. There's not going to be any team-ups, alliances with other characters. They are the most isolated figureheads of organizations in this panel. Now, of course, the reason I think that is important with these 3 characters is because of the contrast on the other side of the page with these 4 characters being shown in Kobe, Kuzan, Figureland, Garling, and Sabo. Now, I think something interesting about these characters is that they're the most morally gray. They have the most room for kind of a change in their ideals or potentially team-ups with someone else and a different faction of the world for the greater good. Obviously, Garling is very unexplored as a character, but I'm just kind of lumping up his relationship with Shanks and also his one line of dialogue as a Celestial Dragon who kills other Celestial Dragons as making him sort of a morally gray character who perhaps thinks what he's doing is wrong but knows it has to be done, something like that. Regardless, I'm going to pencil him in as a question mark. I think I'm just going to lump him in with the others just for the sake of some simplicity, but there is some room for his character to expand beyond what I'm saying. Regardless, something I do want to talk about is something I've seen people talking about on Twitter, where Kobe, Kuzan, and Sabo all have the nose band-aid. And I actually think something is being hinted at here. I know this is probably a stretch, but when I saw Kobe, Kuzan, and Sabo, it just struck a chord within me. I don't understand really where it came from, but when I just saw these three characters, it just all came to me about how their ideals, their motives as characters, and just their vibe is so similar. I think there's going to be some kind of relationship with these characters. I also think something that's interesting is that these three characters are sort of, I don't want to say the apprentices of other larger characters in the series, but they're all very closely related to larger figurehead characters in the series. I think Kuzan is very closely related in proximity to Akainu, you know how they fought for Fleet Admiral, but both have their own ideas of justice, and they're both trying to enact those theories of justice throughout the series. We have obviously Sabo and Dragon, who are literally like apprentice and master, and then Kobe and Garp, who personally I think Garp could have been in this panel, but it obviously would have spoiled if he was alive or not. Regardless, these three characters are similar. They are all fighting for something in a sort of morally gray way, especially Kobe and Kuzan, who are Navy people, but not exactly fighting for the Navy. There's something about these three characters that makes me feel like we could be seeing a team up or a fight with those three or some kind of meshing between them. And again, I want to reiterate, I think Garling could fit into this somehow, especially because of, like I mentioned, he could be like a very morally gray character, but regardless of what this means of him being in this panel, I'm just excited it means we're going to see more of him because I think he's one of the coolest characters on the Marine/world government side of things that we've seen in the entire series, so that's pretty cool. Now let's talk about this mystery character on this panel. I want to put a few theories that I've seen to rest. Not that I think they're bad theories, but I think there are more plausible options, and let me explain why. Now, the first theory is that this is a God's Knight and potentially a Shanks twin. This comes from the fact that the leader of the God's Knights had a silhouette similar to Shanks. This panel has a very, the guy's holding a sword that's very similar to Shanks. And obviously we saw Shanks appear at Marijois back in the Reverie. And this appearance could maybe not be the Shanks we know. It could be his twin brother. I'm going to go ahead and say this is not the case, and here's why. If Shanks had an evil twin, or at least a sibling, which is possible, I think there's no reason for them to be represented in this page because Garling is here. Everyone in this page represents something in their pursuit towards the end of the story, and in my opinion, if that Shanks twin was on this page, they are just fighting for the exact same thing as Figureland, right? It would be like if you put Kizaru or another big marine like Fujitora or Green Bull, maybe not Fujitora because he's kind of a good-hearted person, but if you put Green Bull on this panel when Akainu's already there, or if you put Zoro on this panel when Luffy's already there, it doesn't strike me as purposeful to put a Shanks clone or a God's Knight or someone on this panel when Figureland is already there. So I don't think that's the case. I think it's possible Shanks does have a twin, to be honest with you, but I don't think that's who this panel is. I also don't think this is Loki from Elbaf. Now, I do think Loki from Elbaf will play a pretty important role in the story, considering that's our next arc, but with what this panel represents as characters kind of all clashing at the end of the series, I don't really see how Loki would have any involvement in that. I think he's going to be an arc-centric character, similar to someone like Gecko Moria or like Kiros from Dressrosa, stuff like, just like a character who's very isolated in their own arc and doesn't play that much of an important role towards the whole story, so I don't think there's any reason for this to be him either. Now that we've got those out of the way, I'm going to explain who I think this person is, and this is definitely a stretch, but I think it could fit. With what this panel represents, it is, like I've said a bunch of times, the people who are going to clash at the end of the series for the One Piece. Now, there is one key that leads us to the One Piece, and it is stated to be possessed by a character we don't know yet. It is a mysterious character, and that is the last poneglyph that is being held by the man with the burn scars who sails on a jet black boat and creates whirlpools when anyone gets close to them. That is the only information we have about who owns this last poneglyph, and it does not match any characters we have seen in the story yet. So I think this mysterious figure is the person who owns the last poneglyph, the person with the burn scars. Not only is it a character we just have not seen yet, I think it's the only other character in the series that sort of fits this giant panel of characters fighting for the One Piece, right? It has to be someone who has a huge implication on the story for the rest of these characters, and there is no better person to fill that role than the person who owns the last poneglyph. But who is that person? I think there is one character who's been mentioned, yet not shown or explored at all, who has gargantuan impacts on the story in the past, that for no reason has been mentioned so many times and seemingly has no impact on the story yet. And that is Rox D. Zebek. Yes, I know this is a stretch, but I think if we're going to have a powerful character compete with the rest of the monsters on this page, have a huge impact on the story, and be a character that has not been explored yet still has to have a huge impact on the story, like I just said, I think Rox fits this perfectly. I think he could serve as in sort of information dump. Obviously, God Valley had the biggest clash of important characters in the entire series, and the island is missing, so probably we had some Emu involved over there as well. What better to have a character who probably faced that strength themselves as Rox, and was very closely related to Roger, who set this whole thing in motion, like Vegapunk just told us, be present in the end of the story to serve as either an obstacle for the main characters, or just sort of a clue as to the truth of the real world and what happened at God Valley, right? We still don't know why God Valley is so important towards the future of the story and why Oda has held out so long on telling us the truth. I think the fact that this character is grayed out means that story is coming soon, and we're going to realize it was grayed out because Rox is going to be in the present story. But unfortunately, at the very least, we have to wait 2 weeks for the next chapter, and we're probably going to have to wait a year to find out who this character is. But that is all I have for you. Sorry if these thoughts were extremely jumbled because this chapter was so hype. I had so much just sitting in my brain that I had to blurb out. I'm going to try and edit it as cohesive as possible, but I guess we're in the final saga now. We haven't been technically since the start of Egghead, but it really feels like we're steamrolling straight to the end of the story.